Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Ms. Renee Wynn. Renee is a leader with over 30 years of experience in environmental policy, global information technology, and cybersecurity operations, supply chain risk management, and ESG. She's led programs at Environmental Protection Agency and served as the CIO at an iconic agency known as NASA. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Renee.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. Good morning. We've spent a little bit of time here on the terrestrial part we call Earth. I just want to remind you, this is Earth 1.0. There is no Earth 2.0. So treat her well. All right, so let's talk about space in our daily lives. How many people have flown recently, and you can define it any way you want? This is your exercise for the day. There you go. All right, let's do the other hand now just to keep it even with that. See? So space touches your life every day. So a couple of things that NASA did for you with your airplanes, research with our partners. First is sustainability. If you look out the airplane windows, they go like this. That's for greater reduced fuel use, right? So they are a little bit more aerodynamic. The other thing is what I call the polygon of safety around your airplanes. Airplanes fly closer now than they have in a long, long time. And the reason is they study air turbulence, weather, et cetera, a lot of engineering things. And they have figured out they can move those airplanes just a little bit closer. And they work on those margins on a regular basis. It does make me nervous. I used to never see airplanes out the window, and now every once in a while I'm like, oh, that just looks a little close, doesn't it? When you can see it there. So there's other ways that space is part of your everyday life. Weather. Anyone check the weather today? I have a couple of times here and where I live. I'm hoping at home, while I love the rain and my flowers are doing beautifully, I'd love some sunshine back in Washington, D.C. We are headed for humidity, so summer's on its way. Weather is also a strategic asset. Special operations in our military, they take a look at weather. What's the tides? What's the ground weather like? The texture of the muddy or not muddy. They use weather to move equipment and personnel and that. Then you also have GPS, the part of logistics. How do I get from here to there? Anybody use Uber, Uber Eats, DoorDash, pizza, dating apps? Get it? GPS is embedded in that one. So yeah, your everyday life definitely is impacted by space. But there's more. There's our communication satellites. Sports, perhaps you're watching the NBA right now, maybe not, or football, or the other football, soccer, and that. Those are brought to you by our communication satellites. And those communication satellites are used heavily by the United States government. And so reporting on disasters and things like that. So you kind of get the point, right? Space is part of our everyday lives, which makes it also a strategic asset for the United States government as well as businesses. Businesses that rely on goods going from here to there, or their input. Let's say you're a cement maker, right? You got to get your rocks and your other pieces from here to there. Well, those trucks or trains are operated by GPS systems, and they use that to move them on efficient routes and also not put them in harm's way. So they'll delay a shipment just in case there's bad weather. I circled Denver for 40 minutes yesterday to let those thunderstorms hit. I was grateful for that. That was an excellent use of weather information as far as I was concerned. So, but there's more. There's absolutely more. Anybody got a phone? I'm at a tech conference, so I'm kind of assuming you all do. Mine's back there so it doesn't ring or do something silly, like one of those rings you didn't realize you set that embarrasses you. The cameras. Those cameras were developed for us to take better pictures with a finer pixel in space. And then that technology was turned around and miniaturized even a little bit more in order for us to have them on our cameras. Cryogenics, the study of cold and heat and all of that, that comes from NASA as well. Those spacesuits, they're actually really hot. But when you go out of the space capsule, it's really cold. So they have to do both temperatures really well. If only everyday life allowed us to wear that. But those cryogenics have been plowed back into medical uses. So childbirth is actually still very dangerous, including the United States. So they'll use cooling suits for the mother or the baby, or both, because bringing down the body temperature in a stressful situation allows for a greater opportunity for both the mom and the child, or if it's triplets, all three of them, to live. We also, the materials, Under Armour, all of that, all those materials are based on space tech. So there's just a few things in your daily lives that are impacted by space. And one might think, because space is a few hundred miles up, it's safe from all sorts of threats. Just kidding. That's not true at all. There are several emerging threats that we are seeing in space now, and they're called emerging, but they've been around for a while. One is space debris. Back in the 50s, this Earth that we are on, remember 1.0, there was no space junk flying around. Now, as of 2 years ago, over 25,000 pieces of space debris that is larger than a softball rotate the Earth. DARPA has infused a bunch of research money to try to get down to smaller and smaller pieces because of the hazards any piece of debris traveling at 17,000 miles per hour could cause to any, I call, flying asset. I'll give you an example. So in 2021, the Russians did an anti-satellite test. These are kind of common, or they're not rare, let's say it this way. And the common courtesy for the peaceful use of space is to phone a friend. Hey, by the way, I got a satellite acting funny. I'm gonna shoot it out. And then that debris is gonna make a debris field, and those pieces will move away, just FYI. They didn't do that in 2021. That space debris field came perilously close to International Space Station. So close, the astronauts and cosmonauts were awakened, and emergency procedures were started for them to evacuate. Had they evacuated, we would have lost a tremendous asset for the world, and that's the International Space Station. The International Space Station is designed to be crewed. The newer station that is on the in-works Gateway is designed to be uncrewed for a number of reasons. One, it's expensive to send people back and forth to space. Sometimes they spend longer than planned. Perhaps you heard that. We sent them supplies. It was fine. They have their iPads, so they have movies to watch. They really do. Honestly, they really do have iPads. I got to maintain them. And they're personal. And you don't ordinarily use government resources for personal devices. We know the rule, but they're astronauts. They're away for a year. Oh, no, by the way, they do get TAs when they leave. They do. I kid you not. The only line that they get reimbursed for, because they don't pay by credit card for their rides on SpaceX, they get incidental expenses. I think it's what, $2, $3, $4 a day. Still have no idea what they spend it on. None whatsoever. So that field of debris, right, created a huge problem. A pebble-size piece of debris hit the arm, the Canadian arm as it's called, that is used in a lot of EVAs, extravehicular activities. I don't know why it's called that and not a spacewalk. I do know that engineers name things at NASA. Things have unintended consequences. It blew up. That's pretty straightforward. But they do that. And so they did have to go out and inspect that arm and make sure that it was still safe for use. But there was a hole, and they could still use it. So you can see where understanding the size of the debris becomes pretty important for the safety of our astronauts, but for the thousands of satellites that are in use today and impact our daily lives. So that's space debris. The last emerging threat that I'm going to talk about is cybersecurity. The old way of thinking is that because it's 200 miles off the face of the Earth, that it won't happen. Ha, wrong, wrong. I know, because I've dealt with a couple of these incidents in that. The cyber threat vectors are in uplinks and downlinks. While it takes money, it's easy to capture those if they're not encrypted. And yes, we still send satellites that are not encrypted. So the data is at risk. It's data, right? Second thing is ground systems, both the radars themselves, the lines themselves that traverse the data, what traverses across the globe, and then finally your mission control centers. They're just like any network systems. The science ones I like to call apartment buildings because of the science mission control centers, there's all sorts of different satellites running off of that. And that is older technology, and so you can have lateral movement. And then the final cyber threat is insider threat. Somebody can come to work and decide that they're just going to plug in that USB port to do something really cool and wreck your weekend. So those are the main vectors for cybersecurity in space. But as you know, if we do things differently from the beginning, we can better protect ourselves. We can be resilient from our attacks. Number one, education. And I'm not talking education, cybersecurity training that we all love. I'm talking the education where they earn badges and the head of science goes, I earned my badge for cybersecurity today, which was great because if he hadn't, I'd had to cut him off from the network. And that's always really fun to go toe-to-toe with powerful people. But you have to have consequences if you don't do things. The best way to educate is by the imagination and tell stories and capture their hearts and then kill them with the data. Then there's secure by design, which is great. Satellites that have been sent up from years ago, we've got satellites flying from the 70s. They're over 12 billion miles away. We're not doing any upgrade on them. We can barely stay in touch with them right now. My watch has way more computing power on it than our Voyagers. So they're not secure by design, and I think 12 billion miles away is probably okay for us. And I don't think some of our cyber threat actors really understand the technology that we used in the 60s when this all was on the drawing board to be launched. The launch was in 72, I believe, but the design started back in the 60s. So secure by design. There's detection and monitoring, just like we do here on planet Earth with all of our lovely devices. Then we can have, let's see, what else would we have? Oh, I think the most important part that we have in all of this, I'm going to back up for a second. I'm going to tell you the architecture. I talked about our ground systems and our mission control centers to have more modern architectures in that, to really kind of think about zero trust and implementing it. Now, some of the older architectures we could not go back and change because we can't change the flying asset. So these two things have to keep talking together. But now modern designs are allowing for better architecture for our ground-based systems that we use, having insider threat monitoring systems, using encryption, and now for the final, most important part of how we get through and attack the cyber threats in space. And that's you. That's the people. That's bringing people into the space programs that are cyber professionals. And so they can work with our space professionals to design that. And you say to yourself, gosh, space people never want to talk to me. And that's a true statement. I know, because I work there. And they really didn't want to talk to me. But I would say never let a crisis go to waste. And also use your skills for nefarious but good purposes. So we did a penetration test into a not a classified meeting, but a sensitive meeting. And we took pictures of all the slides. And then I walked into the office of the head of space programs and I said, hey, you recently had a meeting that you had all of these, FOUs on, all the slides were marked and all that. And he's like, well, how do you have them? And I went, that's my point. My point is this. I've just captured your imagination. We need to partner together to better secure NASA's entire network across the globe and in Russia. And I did talk to the head of Roscosmos about cybersecurity because I really wasn't sure what else to talk to him about. I know nothing about rocket engines. So we did have a lovely conversation about cybersecurity. Like, oh, is it an issue for you? As if it isn't. You got to come up with an opener, right? But back to the people part. Capture the imaginations. Work on resilience. Be part of the solutioning. And the best way to do that is to be more interested in them than they are in you. Go to lunch with them. Find out what they do. I shadowed. I went around and I followed all of these folks that did these big jobs just to understand what it was like for them to deal with it. And we made some changes. And the final thing is, for cybersecurity folks, is be yes and. Yes, and I want to hear more about that to see how we can work together. No gets you nowhere. And we tried not to use no, but we did use no back in the early days of COVID over Zoom. And the scientists didn't listen. And the scientists created a big embarrassment for NASA because they got the bombs, the Zoom bombs in there, and people broke into the meetings and said awful, awful things where they broke in. And that was another crisis, and therefore we got them off Zoom, and we were able to use the many tools that we already had. Everyone has a place in space, and I particularly believe anyone in cybersecurity can be part of the solution for having space be a secure place to fly our assets and do our research and maybe even find Earth 2.0. Thank you.